Hi everyone, my name is Jillian McMaster. I'm the Community Engagement Manager here at the Delaplane, and I'm excited to welcome you to our July Art at Noon talk, Experimental Performance Professional Play with Valerie George. Valerie George, she, her, is an artist whose work over the past 20 years has reflected holistically on art and life in the form of installation art, site-specific works, video, performance, sound, sculpture, photography, new media, drawing, collaborative projects, and curatorial practices. Her artistic practice is an exploration of themes of play, chance, entropy, transcendence, and the history of place. Through her work, Valerie George not only questions and redefines the boundaries of art, but also seeks to create a space where art and life converge, offering meditations on the multifaceted experience of being human. George received her MFA from the University of California, Davis, having worked closely with mentors Lynn Hirschman-Leeson and Mary Lucier. She is a full professor of art at the University of West Florida, arts editor of Panhandler Magazine, a journal of art and literature, a member of Good Children Gallery, and a co-founder and co-director of the 309 Punk Project. Please welcome Valerie George.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here with you all. I would much prefer it if I were in the room with you, but since I live in Mobile, Alabama at the moment, that would be hard. Thank you for letting me zoom into your lives and talk a little bit about what it is that I do. Let me have a moment and I'm going to share my screen and get this talk going. All right. So, play from start. So thank you, Jillian. As Jillian said, my name is Valerie George, and one of the reasons I was asked to come talk at this particular Art at Noon was because Corey Frey, who is a good friend of mine, asked me to come talk because Corey knew that I had done a little bit of experimental artwork. And some of that work had a little tongue-in-cheek nod back to your artist that is the inspiration artist of the summer, which is Namjoon Pike. And I believe Namjoon Pike is showcased upstairs in the museum where you are. And so we'll get to that in a moment. But in order to make that make sense, I had to do a pretty deep dive back into the history of my life and my art practice in order to make that all make sense. So bear with me as we time warp back about 15 years. But I will bring us up to almost contemporary speed. Okay, there we go. Okay. So my art process is going to sound a little woo-woo. Let's just say that out loud. To say things like I see visions and I hear things and I experience strange creative urges and impulses. I know how that makes me sound. But the truth is, it is the experience that I have. I do see things behind my eyelids when I'm sleeping or when I'm resting. Images come to my mind when I'm driving or when I'm bathing. Anytime my body and my brain slows down or is occupied with other tasks that I can put myself sort of like in that auto mode, my brain starts to explore the imaginative side of itself. And that's what I mean by seeing visions and hearing things. And I just allow these things to wash over me. And sometimes the things that I think about or I imagine in terms of art are kind of scary. They make me question whether or not that's going to make sense, whether or not it's going to touch anyone, whether or not I can connect with the audience based on those things. But I've learned to trust myself as an artist, and that those are the moments that are most important to jump into and to leap into, really. So I've come to understand that these visions are shaped by my imagination, my lived experience, my education, my punk DIY philosophy. I was sort of raised in the punk scene in the 90s, in the DIY scene, big part of who I am, art history, and an enduring curiosity about the world around. I didn't always trust myself, though. I went to graduate school at UC Davis, as I said, and I graduated in 2003. So in the early 2000s, I was surrounded by professors who came of age in the 80s. So, not only were they telling me that I should spend all my money on my art and just put it on a credit card, they were also saying things like, art looks a certain way, it functions a certain way. Art with a capital A is exactly this, and it cannot be anything else. And therefore, I made art that looked like art and smelled like art, and therefore must be art. And I was good at it. I was very good at it, and it was fulfilling in its own right. But at the end of the day, I simply was not fulfilled with my practice. Something was missing. I felt like there was imposter syndrome happening, that I was wearing the pants of this capital A artist, but didn't really know how to walk around in them, if that made sense. And so when I was hired at UWF, which is the University of West Florida, which is where I currently teach, which was 22 years ago. I was at age 30 and I moved to Pensacola, Florida. And in Pensacola, Florida, I found a DIY scene that welcomed me back in and allowed me to really explore my art practice in a way that I couldn't really do in San Francisco, mainly because I couldn't afford space to get really big because of the prices and things like that, and work really largely. But I also just found a lot of confidence in myself, and I allowed myself to just be. So I moved back to Pensacola, age 30, and I decided the gift I was going to give myself was to teach myself how to play drums. And that's what I did. I was also making visual art at the same time, but I was also in a band. And I was playing shows at the local DIY scene and local dives and hanging out with these wonderful people. And this is me playing a show at 309, which is now the 309 Punk Project where I work, but 2010. And because of all that experience playing drums and being in bands, sound of drums started to show up in my imagination. But it was the imagination that was obsessed with art, not obsessed with music. And that was new for me. But I knew that sound and noise wasn't new for the art world. It was just new for me. And I had sort of been taught in these more academic settings that there was no place for sound and music art. And I just decided to tap into my punk backbone and say, I'm not listening to that anymore. I have a vision and I have an urge to hear something. And this is the thing that I saw and I heard. At the time, I drove a 1983 Mercedes station wagon, and I wanted to see what it would look like if I put my drums on the roof rack of the car. I also wanted to hear what it looked like if I drove. And I loved it. I thought it was beautiful. I thought it sounded incredible. And the only problem with it was that only 3 people, other than myself, could experience it at a time. I could put 3 people in the car with me and we could drive around and have a great moment. But if you're an artist trying to get your work out into the world, that was not a fast way to do it. So I realized that if I could build a recording studio inside the car, I could then record everything that I was hearing when I drove my drums. I could also sit in the back of the car and have somebody else drive and play other instruments and record live while I'm driving around the car in the rain. I can basically go anywhere I want and record anything I want, and this car turns into. I build this recording studio inside my car, and it is opening up these all these new possibilities. And I trusted myself to tap my punk roots earlier in this process. And so I thought, okay, how am I going to get this out in the world? Well, I'm going to do what I did with my band. I'm going to take it on tour. We're just going to book events at museums and art spaces all across the country. And we're going to make a record while we do it. And so that is what I did. And I called myself, I traveled under the moniker Nam June Psych. So in early 2010, I began recording site-specific sounds and collaborating with other experimenters and other sound artists in natural landscapes under the moniker Non June Site. I worked from my mobile recording studio that I designed and built inside my 83 Mercedes station wagon. My very first stop was to record with a good friend of mine who lived at 309. You're going to hear me talk about 309 a lot. It's a big part of my life. It was a punk house and still is to some degree, but also an artist in residence program. But he was one of the first artists that lived there. He was in a band called This Bike is a Pipe Bomb, and was an incredible human and musician and songwriter. So when he moved to Chattanooga, he was my first stop, and I said, "Hey, Ryan, take me to that place, your favorite place, out in nature, so we can record your favorite song. And I'm going to play along with you with this little toy xylophone, and we're going to incorporate all the sounds that most recording artists try to get rid of, like the birds and the wind and the wind in the trees and all of that sort of thing. I want that stuff in these songs." And he says, "Okay, let's get in the car." And we drive to the top of the mountain, and we immediately get stuck. My car is stuck in the mud, right there and on the mountain. And we had a few hours to wait for the tow truck to find us. So we said, "Let's do this." So we jumped out of the car, set up the gear, and used the electricity from the extra batteries I had installed in my car to run all of this gear and record on a off-grid site. This jumps way across the country. This is a recording I did with a dear friend of mine named Terry Burlier. She teaches at Stanford now as a sculpture professor at Stanford, and also makes sound and noise instruments. This is one of her percussion drums that she built back in 2010. And the person in the red shirt back there was my tour mate at the time. And his name is Anthony Hilavity. I have to say, I couldn't do any of this stuff without Anthony. He was in the former bands and the pictures that you saw of me playing regular punk music. But also Anthony is a creative and is a collage artist, and sort of got this project and agreed to spend a month on the road with me, setting up this gear and tearing it down every single day. So that's who you've got back there. And you might see that he's taken some grass from the surrounding area and stuck it up into the guitar. And so as the wind blows, the grass sort of hits the strings on the guitar. So we're recording that really subtle sound too. Another friend, here's Davis, California. I had to plug my home, my alma mater. Garrett is a friend of mine, still lives in Davis and is a winemaker now, but also still a singer-songwriter. And he wanted us to go to this incredible reserve that is preserved for bird watching. So you hear all of these water birds and all of these frogs and all of these crickets in the background of this gorgeous love song that he's playing acoustically. In Portland, we hang out with Convenient Mountains. This is a really noisy, strange band, and super fun human beings. But this was their favorite spot in Portland. So we pull up to this location, and as you can sort of see, or maybe you can, Tony and I went and got a bunch of driftwood and connected contact mics to it, and then ran them through a bunch of weird sound altering pedals and recorded this composition there on site. When I got home from tour, the fest circuit, or basically the festival circuit picked me up. The fest was, is still going every year, is mainly a hardcore punk festival. But in 2010, there were lots of different kinds of music there. And This Bike is a Pipe Bomb and Scum of the Earth were playing. So they brought me along to record that set. So we did that. That was a great time. And also, a woman by the name of Mindy Abowitz saw a picture of my drum kit on my car and said, I've got to put this woman in my magazine. And so she created a magazine called Tom Tom, and it's a magazine about female drummers. And she basically took me under her wing and made me her kind of a mascot, really, and took me to South by Southwest with her to record the showcase of bands there, and put me in the magazine, which was a lovely spread. And then we did a second tour where I recorded all of these bands, which brought me face to face with some of my personal heroes. This is Yoko Ono's drummer. Her name is Migu. So I got to record her. I got to record Tune Yards, Mike Watt from the Minutemen. Tape Op also picked me up. I don't know if there are any audiophiles in the audience, but if you know any, then they've got stacks of these all over their house because they're free and they just show up. I made a video archive. So there's a video for for at least one song out of everything, out of every band or every group of people I recorded. So on my website, you can watch videos to go along with some of these and sort of see what it is that's making the sounds that you're hearing. I made 5 records, but I put them all out on tape along with a poster and a zine. And I worked with a former student, Samantha Williams, who is now living in LA doing great things. But she designed my posters and all of my stuff with me, which was super fun. And this is sort of what it looks like when you put this body of work on the wall in a white cube space. This body of work is currently in the Alabama Triennial, which I'm very excited about. So it was wonderful to be able to dig this whole thing up. There's actually much more than this one wall, but this is just the one image. But to dig all of this up and to take it to be selected as one of the 8 or 9 artists in the state that they wanted to sort of showcase for this particular triennial was very impactful and meaningful, and I'm humbled for that. So it is up right now, and it's nice to know that work that's 15 years old is still interesting and engaging to people. So just for funsies, I traveled over 5,000 miles and recorded over 45 artists and bands. I produced 5 albums in exactly 1 year. So while the car kit has been destroyed, the videos and the photographs and the sculptures remain and can be seen around from time to time or in its entirety on my website. It does not like me using my arrow keys. So at that very moment, I talk about how the car was destroyed. That is a truth. A year of great times went by way too fast, and then a city of Pensacola truck ran a red light and totaled the car. Shortly after that, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So everything sort of took a pause while I regrouped and figured out what I was going to do. I felt like I still had, no pun intended, many miles left on that project, and I did not get to see it all the way through, but it also didn't feel right recreating the projects, like buying a new car, resetting it up, like it just didn't feel right. So I sat on it for a moment and I waited for something to happen. And something did. My friend Felicia Shizuko Carlisle and I were talking. She's one of my best dear friends. So we were probably talking more about cancer than when we were talking about art. But in all of that conversation about what to do with myself while I'm facing mortality and thinking deeply about what it means to be alive and how short life is and what's really meaningful and what really matters, she had the brilliant idea to say, I don't know, but let's figure it out together. And so she invited me down to Miami, which is where she lived at the time. And we went to a place called Locust Projects and hit up a curator by the name of Leilani Lynch, who just won a Warhol Foundation curatorial thing. So I'm just giving her a yay. She was so open to the ideas that we brought to her. And she basically gave us a little bit of money and free range of Locust Projects to explore this idea in which Felicia and I would build some discrete sound sculptures that the audience could come in and play. And those sculptures would be amplified so you could hear that play over in the entire gallery. And Leilani also was kind enough to allow us to even bring more crazy people into the mix. You might recognize some of these names. We tapped some of the people that we had both worked with before, both she individually and us together as a collaborative sound team. So Mindy, Terry, Luciana, all of these folks are people that we knew from working in the art world, and we asked them if they'd be willing to bring something to the table and show up and create compositions with the sculptures that we had made and installed in the gallery. And we also asked them to come up with their own ideas and bring things with them to set up in the gallery. So before I dig any further, let me sort of show you or talk you through what Felicia and I built. So in the front room of the gallery, there are two rooms. They're separated by a wall with a door. And in one room, Felicia created this beautiful sculpture. It is made of recycled and reclaimed, basically the metal boat rails that you see on boats. I mean, we live in Miami. They're discarded or they're on the side of the road everywhere. So they're these chrome and stainless steel metal rails. And we sort of arranged them on the wall in this interesting abstract shape and then strung piano wire between them, clipped contact mics to them. I don't know if you all can see my arrows, but clipped contact mics to them and run those into amplifiers. So when you drug a bow across it or you plucked it with your fingers, you would hear that sound very loud throughout the whole gallery. What I did in the other room is I created what I call a microphone chandelier, which is nicknamed the feedback monster. But if it's dialed in perfectly, and it usually takes me a few hours to do so, once I dial it in perfectly, I don't get a feedback monster. I get a very beautiful sculpture. Here's another install shot of Felicia's sculpture and another install shot of my sculpture with some lighting and part of Terry Burlier's multiple sculpture inside. But you can see there's about 30 microphones hung from the ceiling, and all of them are run through different guitar pedals and into a basically a PA system that kicks everything out into and pipes the sound into the rest of the gallery, mixed very beautifully with Felicia's piece. So in the back, we have another room, and this is Mindy's contribution. Of course, she is a drummer, so she brought her drums. But instead of setting them up in a natural, normal way, she wanted to see what they would look like if they were hung from the ceiling. And Darren Kendall, he brought a very interesting instrument. He brought this car. He collaborated with a local artist in town that also installs lifts into lowriders in Miami. And so you'll see in a minute when I play a video for you, basically for the performance that Darren Kendall and this artist did, the person that owned the car sat inside the car and basically lifted the car based on hand movements that he and Darren had like worked out, that had choreographed. And we put contacts mics on the inside of the car and ran those through some pedals to make them have some interesting sounds, so that we actually use the car as an instrument here. This is Luciano Chessa, who is out of Berkeley. He is a composer and a wonderful dear friend of mine. And he is currently playing a saw while crawling and walking up and down this staircase that Terry Burlier had built. And let's give you a little sound to go with this. Valerie George.
Alicia Carlisle.
And the name of our exhibition is
Sounding Room. Sounding Room is a space that we've created to experiment with sound and sculpture and performance. We're considering location and space and spatial relationships as elements to work with to compose.
Invited people from all across the country to come collaborate with us to enjoy the work that we've created in this space, but also make something new.
The other artists brought an element with them, to add to the space over time, to constantly being created and constantly evolving.
I think in the end, we didn't mean for each of the performances to have a similar thread of content, but they ended up very much being about the video that Christy Gast and Ian had collaborated on, The Melting Glacier. Locus really provided a place for us to explore our instruments that we created, explore space in a new way, explore performance in a new way.
Being able to take that knowledge with us into other venues is priceless.
So once we wrapped up Sounding Room, I went back to Pensacola because I was living at Pensacola at the time, and took a breather. I had to go through cancer treatment before we installed Sounding Room, and then again, just it takes a minute to bounce back from that good stuff. And in the meantime, I had applied for sabbatical, and luckily I was granted sabbatical. However, about 2 months before sabbatical came about, I was diagnosed with breast cancer for the second time and had to deal with that recurrence. And so I did so, and all was well. But I had already planned this big major trip, and nothing was going to come between me and my sabbatical, not even cancer. So I let myself fall into that trust one more time, that it was the right move to embark on this new idea. And the idea that I had was to travel across the country. You may see a theme here. I'm really into driving myself back and forth across the country. But I wanted to travel across the country to visit land art sites. And I wanted to work very intuitively at those land art sites, to work site specifically. But the reason that land art really called to me was I sort of see them as the punks of the art scene. They were like, I don't need to be in the white walls. I don't need all this. I don't need your approval. I'm just going to go out into the world and do my own thing. And I also saw a relationship with what I did with the Namjoon psych project about being out in the world and being out in nature. I find that I do enjoy a studio practice, but I really, really thrive in a practice that allows me to be out of the studio and come back in to fine tune. So I researched all of this land art material. I was fascinated with Robert Smithson and his writings. Loved Nancy Holt from a very young art student. Walter DiMaria also was a drummer and did an amazing piece playing drums to the sound of the ocean, which was a very inspiring, moving piece for me. And of course, Michael Heiser and Dennis Oppenheim. And so I decided that I did want to work site responsively. And that means that the artist is concerned with the experience of being in particular places. And these sites, these land art sites, are loaded with their own history, right? So I had to really think deeply about what it was that I was going to do there, and how I was going to have a conversation with that artwork. Well, you can plan all you want, but what happens when you arrive, when you embark on a practice like this, is that you realize that sometimes you don't, you're not able to plan. You just have to go with what your heart and your gut and your intuition tells you to go with. One of the other reasons I really was drawn to land art pieces, and I'm just using Spiral Jetty as an example, is that land art, it's out in the elements, it's exposed to the sun, it's lying flat on its back in the desert, it's decomposing every moment that passes. It's changing depending on how you look at it, depending on, in Spiral Jetty's case, the bacteria in the water, the colors change, the experience changes. And one of the other reasons that Spiral Jetty was like really capturing my imagination is, I don't know, some of you may know this, but it was underwater for years. And it was a big deal when Spiral Jetty finally, when the water receded enough for the jetty to be visible again and for you to actually walk on it. And there was a big spread in Art Forum and in Sculpture Magazine the year that it happened. And it was just been a bucket list is to get to see Spiral Jetty. So that was my first stop on this sort of artist journey. And this is what it looked like when I arrived at sunset. It took me quite some many days to get there driving, and well worth the wait. And when I woke up the next morning, I noticed that the Great Salt Lake was just full of these beautiful icebergs made of salty foam. And I just happened to look down and find this little guy. And it's not little, actually. It was a very large and long piece of foam, probably sort of, it was in the shape of a cocoon and almost the size of a small human, maybe a child. And I was just really taken with this foam, and it was laying there on the ground and just sort of moving in the wind. And so I took out my video camera, and this is what I collected. Okay, now I think I'm going to get this right this time. Stopping this share and starting a new share with the video, Google Chrome. And then yes. All right, that should be correct. And this one doesn't have much by way of sound, so it's okay if I don't need to annotate. What are you doing? So it was at that moment that I realized that the work that I was going to do with at these land art sites was going to have to be about mortality and was going to have to be about the passage of time and entropy. And so my next stop, well, here's where I come up with the title, Entropic Force, Land Art, and the Mortal Frame. I'm still making this work. So I've been doing this practice for the past 10, 11 years. It is an ongoing series that ponders the theoretical relationship shared between famous 1970s land art sites, and I've expanded that to include World Heritage sites and the human body. These site-specific responses explore notions of the artist's journey, virgin landscapes, mark making, mythology, aging, preservation, death, and disintegration, all in relation to the mortal form. My next stop was to Sun Tunnels by Nancy Holt. This is a shot of sun tunnels taken in the 70s. And you can see the scale of these tunnels as that's a human there, probably Nancy herself. If you don't know anything about sun tunnels, the very short story is that they are 4 concrete tubes that have holes drilled into the tops and the sides of the tubes that during summer and winter solstice align with the stars above them. So they are literally laying on their back looking at the stars, and during these celestial moments, visitors can come out, they can camp overnight, they can get inside the tubes and stare at the stars and watch them line up. This is what they looked like when I arrived. And I was really taken with how they just sort of felt like had this presence, these like entities that were laying on their backs looking at the sun, but also they were lined up so that you could see through them and it really examine their insides. I was also sort of taken with, I'm not sure if you can see it, but it appears like there's a female figure lying on her back. I see a breast here. I had breast cancer. Breast was on the mind there. Maybe it was just me, but that is what I saw. And so my response was to the next day photograph myself lying in the desert to mimic that mountain that I saw back there and project them onto the tunnels during sunset. And this is the image that I collected. So this is the work that I show in the exhibition. I should take a moment to sort of talk about the fact that this is a lot harder to make than it looks. People who are used to technology of 2025 think about, of course, they make battery powered projectors. Well, in 2016, I could not afford a battery powered projector. So I had to build a cart with a giant battery pack of stacking, interlocking car batteries and plug my projectors into a little converter that I bought that would convert the battery DC power to this to serve and charge to power my projectors. I had exactly 7 minutes from the moment that I plugged 2 projectors into this battery bank to get the photograph. So it was kind of an intense experience. I was also there by myself. So all of this was done on my own. My next stop was at Double Negative. This is a piece made by Michael Heiser. It is absolutely stunning. This is the aerial view from it in 1969. And as you can see, he has dug a gash into the side of this plateau overlooking the Moapa Valley. And when it was first dug, it was pristine and absolutely stunning. Over time, by the time I got there, it was a much more rugged. And if anybody is familiar with art history or feminist critique of land art, and Michael Heiser in particular, they sort of tongue in cheek like to critique his masculine gash in the earth. And my interest in responding to this piece had more to do with thinking about projecting my legs onto this site, to create a more feminine response to this body of work. I really loved how the projections of the photographs of my legs onto the sides of the sculpture looked like, just incredible Renaissance fresco. And my last stop was Amarillo Ramp by Robert Smithson. In 1973, he started this work, and unfortunately met his end here. He was in an airplane surveying the land, and the airplane crashed, and it killed him and the pilot. His wife, Nancy Holt, finished the sculpture for Robert Smithson posthumously. And I was fortunate enough to go see this ramp as it stands. This is what it looked like when it was created. And this is what it looked like when I got there in 2016. And as you can see, it's definitely, the earth is meeting it and bringing it back home, as it appears here. So I took a picture of myself on top of the ramp, and then at sunset projected my body onto the ramp and photographed it. So the projection is here on the sculpture. And this is what the work looks like installed. So I often bring ephemera. I collected a little bit of dirt, a little bit of salt, and took several other photographs on the sites while I was there. But the culmination, or the largest moment of the work, are the larger photographs or the video projection. There are several of these, and you can see all of them installed on site or in a white cube space, documented on my website. So that is all there. And yes, thank you. That is conclusion of my talk.